Ha ha ha! Welcome to QueAquatics and Exotics. My name's Suzy, and today I want to talk about sponge filters. I have sponge filters in all my tanks. I don't know if you have 1 tank, 2 tanks, 5 tanks, or 50 tanks, or more. It's my preferred method of biofiltration. I wouldn't want to keep fish without them, and here's why.
Hey everybody, it's SuzyQue and I'm here to show you just what I do. I have a passion for fish and exotics too, so come along with me, it's SuzyQue. Hey.
So I want to start off with how I was introduced with the sponge filter. It started with my very first tank, had no idea what I was doing. I walked into my local fish store, fish factory. I was trying to set up my very first tank. I was making a birthday present for my granddaughter. At the time was turning 2. And I wanted to get her some guppies or fish. Didn't know what kind, really, because I hadn't really started doing much research. But I had a couple of 10-gallon tanks lying around the house because I used them for other purposes. I used to keep a lot of my miniatures in fish tanks to keep tiny fingers out of them. So I went in to pick out some fish, and the guy, Rob, and he asked if I had the tank set up. I said, well, I have an empty tank, but it's not set up yet. And he asked when her birthday was. I said, it's tomorrow. He said, you're going to have to cycle the tank first. I'm like, what? That's where I learned about the nitrogen cycle. And I'll put a link up here if you're not sure what the nitrogen cycle is. Very critical for keeping your fish alive in your fish tank. So I asked him, well, what else do I need? He said, you're going to need a filter. And I had a little hang on the back filter that I bought. And he said, you might want a sponge filter to go along with that. I'm like, okay, why would I want a sponge filter? And he said, so when I'm cleaning out the other filter, you'll leave the sponge filter alone because it's going to house a lot of that beneficial bacteria. And then when you go to clean the sponge filter, you'll leave your hang on the back filter alone. So you'll always have your beneficial bacteria growing, the colony going strong, and you're not cleaning all your equipment at the same time. And I said, okay, and he gave it to me. It was a beautiful, I think it was a light yellow sponge. And he said, and don't expect this sponge to stay yellow. Boy, he wasn't kidding. He said, trust me. It's going to get grungy. It's going to look dirtier. You can hide it behind plants or whatever, but you're going to want to keep it. You're not going to want to bleach it and get it yellow ever again. I'm like, all right. I'm trusting this guy. I want my fish to stay alive for my granddaughter. Certainly don't want to get her a birthday present and have them all die. That was my introduction to sponge filters. And since then, through many different reasons, sponge filters have become my favorite way to filter my tanks. I live in an area that has a lot of power outages, and not all of my hang-on the back filters restart back up again. I've burned out several motors. When I'm at work and I lose power, all that beneficial bacteria that I have in my hang-of-the-back filter, by the time I get home from work, is probably gone. And for me, the way my fish room is set up, unplugging and plugging in is a chore. So many times that's happened. Or the impellers, oh my gosh, it's broken. I've had to replace impellers. There's other times I just can't get them to work and I don't know why. I've tried lubricating the little squirrely thing. I've tried replacing parts. It's, for me, other people live and swear by them. Now, since then I found a couple that I really like, Tidal. But anyway, the sponge filter though has never stopped working for me, and I really like it. And I have found that I can keep all my fish very happy and healthy as long as I use a sponge filter and do my water changes. I do water changes and gravel vacs all the time on my tanks. I get out debris that way, and the sponge filter is going to act as a biological filtration. Let me talk about another reason why I really love these sponge filters. Now this community tank houses my amazing electric blue Jack Dempseys that are a little camera shy, my Polypterus. It's a beautiful community of fish. I enjoy it, peaceful, they enhance each other. But there's also another community living in that sponge filter. And that's a community of microorganisms. So yes, I have my beneficial bacteria in there, but there's also a lot of other microorganisms that can be used as food. If you've ever squeezed a ZESEN sponge filter and you squeeze it, there can be a liquid that comes out, almost looks to the consistency of chocolate milk. Chocolate water. But trust me, that's not waste. That is a colony, it's a whole community of microorganisms living together in your sponge that is enhancing your fish tank and your fish's life. So, do I want to squeeze it out? It wouldn't hurt anything. It would make my tank brown for a while. Those microorganisms are going to settle on things I don't want them to settle on. They might cover my leaves. Those microorganisms, it's an additional source of food. I see my fish picking at it. They're not eating the sponge filter. Well, the red devil is picking apart the sponge filter. He's not eating it, which is why he's got a box filter. Similar, but not quite. It can be a sponge filter, but that's another story. But most of my fish I can see picking at that filter, and they're not picking at the filter, they're picking at the food that's in these microorganism colony. Some of the main reasons that I love my sponge filter, besides being biological filtration, housing all these microorganisms, it's safe for my fry. My fry aren't going to get sucked into these coarse sponges and get stuck in there. And they're very easy to power on and power off. A very gentle flow. Not even a flow, it's more of a water agitation. And it provides aeration, especially when you put an air stone inside your sponge filter. Small piece of tubing, an air stone. Any air stone will work. Some are better than others. You want to make sure that it's going to drop down. Attach it to here. Click it back in place, because if it's not clicked, it would come apart, duh. So now I am going to show you the difference between with and without. And if you're from Philly, you know what I'm talking about. I'm going to drop them both in. Now we're going to see if we can see the difference between the two, and you tell me which one's which. I'll put them a little closer together for these purposes. I'll hold them. Okay. Can you tell the difference? Okay. Can you tell the difference? Here's the difference that I can tell. This one has one line of bubbles coming up. This has 4 lines of bubbles coming up, just broken up a little bit more. So that's the difference between having an air stone in one and not the other. And I'm going to say they're easy to clean, but there is an art to it. So let me show you how I clean my sponge filter and get as very little of that amazing brown muddy water in my tank. Although it's not going to hurt my tank, it takes a while to settle. And then once it does settle on new surfaces, it might not be settling on the surfaces that you want it to settle on. I prefer that muddy, brown colony of amazing microorganisms stays in my sponge. Let me show you how I do that. I don't have to clean the sponge filter often, but when I do, I want to try not to let too much of the colony, that community of microorganisms escape. Here's what I do. And there's 2 different ways I do it. Either I'm using a bag, or I have a pitcher, like a water pitcher. And one of the key ways to do this is to get this bag, scoop it underneath the sponge filter as you lift it up. Because if I just lift it up, and I'll show you on another one, that I will lose all that brown, all that whole community of microorganisms will spew out all over my tank, and I don't want that. So I got my bag, I'm going to come in for the kill. Oh, I shouldn't do that. I'm going to come down. First, let's get my bag in. I'm going to bring the bag down and under. I hope you can see this. And up like this. Oop. So here I am rinsing it off in a pail, but this pail isn't fresh water. What it is water from the tank. So I don't have to worry about killing all that beneficial bacteria. I'm just going to get rid of some of that colony there. I'm going to get rid of some of the brown. And there's two main types of sponge filters that I could do. I mean, there's all different shapes and sizes and decorative. The material that it's made of is either polyether and polyethylene. Polyether is a little more expensive. It's much harder to find. More than likely not in any of your big box stores, or maybe not even in your local fish store. It's resistant to heat and chemicals, and it lasts, I want to say, forever. But I don't want to, ever is a very long time, for very, very long time. Where the polyethylene, they're the more common sponge filters that we see on the market. They're more affordable, they're easy to find. They're sensitive to certain alkali and acids. So if you're doing deep clean washing them and sterilizing them, you could be degrading them every time. And they do lose their elasticity. You squeeze it and it doesn't bounce back. If you're squeezing it and it doesn't bounce back, you're losing airflow. So those are the two that I found, the two groups that I put them in, polyether and polyethylene. But if we're going to stick with the ones that's more easy to find, polyethylene, there's all different courses that can help with that, losing that elasticity, that squeeze in and not bouncing back. When they're talking sponge filters, you'll hear the words, or the letters, I should say, PPI, and that's just pores per inch. Sometimes they don't talk about what the PPI actually is. They'll just say if it's very fine, medium, coarse, and I have a very difficult time with very fine and fine. And I find that the medium to coarser pores still houses all the beneficial bacteria that I need, as well as letting the air flow through, so I don't have to squeeze out all those microorganisms every time, every week. I can let it cultivate inside my sponge filter, and if I don't disturb it, there is no milky, muddy substance leaking out of it. It just stays put. Let's talk about how we power up these sponges. You could start off with these little tiny, it's just that big. And it's plug it into a USB into your outlet. That one's powering these two tanks. Just from that little guy. Adorable. So they come in all different shapes and sizes. This is also a USB. This one has 2 outlets. This one has 4 outlets. This one has a strength to go higher, lower. This large one has 2. This smaller one has 1. But even if you have a small one and have 2 tanks, all you need is a splitter. And you put the air line in from your pump to here, and now all of a sudden you got 2 live valves for 2 different tanks. Or if you wanted one for a sponge filter and one for a bubbler. And these aren't it, there are so many more. And I have used this size for 3 or 4 tanks. I have used this size for several tanks. So I was pushing it to the limit. But you can actually just use that for 1 tank. Now, I have the linear piston air pump. That one pump is actually powering all of my tanks. All these tanks. Oop, that light's off. And if you have your tank set up with a sponge filter and you lose power, all you have to do is grab one of these battery operated pumps, and it's going to give you power. It's going to give you air while you don't have any power. You don't have to do anything but change the air line from the pump to this. Now I pulled this one out, is a little different. This one is a battery operated pump that you can plug in. So when the power goes out, this will kick right on when you flip the switch. So this one's pretty interesting. So yeah, all different ways. It can go from the smallest tank to the largest tanks. So thanks for coming along, listening about the sponge filters. I'd love to hear from you if you use sponge filters. And if you don't, why not? And if you do you have other reasons why you use them besides the reasons I had? I would love to hear them in the comments. Thanks guys, and I will see you next time.
Hey, everybody, it's SuzyQue. Hey, everybody, it's SuzyQue. Nah, hey, everybody, it's SuzyQue. So come along with me. Said I'm SuzyQue.